Lawyers of Reddit. What's the worst way you've seen a person screw over someone else in court, whether it be criminal, civil, or divorce proceedings? A witness for the plaintiff in a civil suit, who was a co-worker of the plaintiff, testified very strongly against the company and in favor of the plaintiff. I questioned her about bias toward the plaintiff, if they knew each other well, were friends, etc. She said, no, just friendly co-workers. Work friends at best. I pinned her to it. When I got a chance to cross-examine the plaintiff, she had no choice but to burn her witness's credibility. Because not only were they very close friends, but they had become sisters-in-law just a few years before. No, they did not have the same last name or anything. But I had done my homework. I still don't get why people want to fight small bias by destroying their credibility. But it happens more than you'd think. Even though the police and DA could pretty much pinpoint the crime to her client, there was no evidence to tie him to the crime. Circumstantial at best. She had instructed him to shut up and let her do the talking during the trial. As from experience, the client sometimes does not know how to answer a question properly. She pleads and can show that the court has nothing on her client. She feels that for once, a pro bono case is going her way. After her plea, the judge thanks her for her plea and turns to her client. He asks if the client had something to add to the plea. Client looks at her, back at the judge. Tears well up in his eyes and he blurts out, "I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again." She threw her notes and everything else she had in her hands at the client, now convict, apparently. She basically got screwed by her own client, who screwed himself even worse. A friend kept meticulous records of how much time his estranged wife spent with their daughter. He used pink highlighter for mom and blue highlighter for himself. Mom sailed into arbitration demanding full custody and handsome child support in the house. Dad pulled out 3 years' worth of year-long calendars. Mom had spent less than a full month with the child in 3 years. Mom was not happy with the outcome. Not my case, but my dad's. He was the equivalent of a public defender decades ago. There was this guy that would get caught for being drunk in public lewdness, etc. every weekend. He seemed to draw the same judges and was pretty well known to everyone in the courthouse as an absolute lost cause. One of the regular judges had him appear in his court again. The judge is ready to give him a prison sentence because he was driving a car this time. But the guy starts crying that he finally got a job out of town and was trying to turn his life around. Judge tells him as long as he never makes a mistake in my town again he would just drop the charges. Well, sure as hell the guy shows up the following Monday. Same judge. Driving drunk again. My dad now has his case. The judge tells him he gave him his final chance. To which the guy sobs and replies, "I was leaving town, Your Honor. But my friends decided to throw me a going away party." The judge was not amused. My dad had to do everything he could to not laugh. TLDR, perpetual drunk that drove drunk gets a chance to leave town and not face charges. Gets drunk at a going away party in his honor. Drives. Goes to jail. Face the same judge both times. I'm currently representing a sweet old lady on a case. I'll be sparse in the details in case anyone figures out who I am. Long story short, this lady's neighbor convinces her that her house is basically unsellable. That her house requires all sorts of repairs. The repairs to the house would bankrupt her. And that she should just sell the house to him. He shows up at her house the next day with documents to sign. She has no idea what's going on. Doesn't read anything. Actually has an eye condition. And signs everything. When she finally sees a lawyer to close the deal, he says, "WTF, you can't do this." You see, the price of the transaction was about 36% of what the house is actually worth, and there weren't any repairs that needed to be done that would justify the price. Not kidding. It was stuff like fixing a faucet in the bathroom. Also, she didn't understand that she would have nowhere to live afterwards. Old lady thought she could just stay in the house until she died. To make matters worse, she's living off a modest pension and the other side is suing for the house. They are essentially trying to get her to cave because her legal fees are getting exorbitant. I hate people. Kind of a self-screw, but the MPAA entered DVD John's code for breaking DVD copy protection as part of their lawsuit into their evidence, which then became public record. The code that breaks DVD copy protection was now available to the entire world, defeating the entire purpose of their lawsuit. That really was a moment of genius. Not caught. But live PD traffic stop I was watching and the guy told the officer I have caffeine pills in my back pocket, gets them out, puts them on the hood. Everyone's chill. Dude then comes clean and says it's Molly and the officers look at each other and go, do we even have a test kit for that? Other officer says no, dude's face just shows he should have kept his mouth shut. I was a very new lawyer with no bankruptcy experience. A partner sent me to bankruptcy court to try to make a claim as a creditor related to a $50 million building that was being sold. Time and lack of knowledge will prevent me from accurately describing everything that went down, but I will do my best. The court handled my client's claim very quickly and easily at first. The court ruled we were not a creditor because our claim was against a tenant, which was correct. Note: we had purchased the claim from someone merely to try to somehow wedge our way into buying the property, which was very transparent to the court. So I could just sit back for the remainder of the hearing and watch the two premier bankruptcy attorneys go at it. One represented the debtor and the owner of the building, the other represented a secured creditor with a lien against the building. They absolutely hated each other on a personal level, and were arguing with great venom about the plan to sell the real estate. There was a small break in the action while the judge took care of another matter. When we came back, the secured creditor attorney told the court the following. His client, the creditor, had purchased controlling interest in the debtor, the owner of the building. He had been directed to fire the other attorney. He had been directed to withdraw the motion to sell the real estate. He then did both there in the courtroom. I have practiced for almost 3 decades. It was the most baddest thing I had ever seen, and was particularly noteworthy because the courtroom was packed with other attorneys watching, and those two attorneys absolutely hated each other. Too many criminal client situations to count of them screwing themselves over. One of the very few family law cases I handled as a young atty sticks out to me though. Young woman and young man have child. Young woman seeks divorce from young man because he enjoys the thug life. He had recently been arrested and charged for possession with intent to distribute, felony, and in possession of a firearm, unlawful carry. Young man doesn't like her leaving him. He hires a local big name top divorceee, granted. Very rural area. Gets temp divorce order entered saying she cannot have overnight guests of the opposite gender, common in rural conservative areas. Think it's mostly a thing of the past in more urban places. Young woman starts seeing someone new. Young man is very upset about this. Has his fancy lawyer ask for a hearing accusing her of violating court order and seeking full custody. On top of atty fees. Young woman, on advice from a mutual friend, hires me for this hearing. I sit down with opposing counsel, and she basically tries to strong-arm me with her experience and lays out egregious terms. Mother must not only give up primary custody, but must have visitation with a supervisor and pay child support and atty fees. She knows I'm a new baby atty in town, fairly certain I had been licensed for less than a year. I balk and she says she'll see us in court. I go into hearing with a copy of his probation arrangement on his posse W intent to sell unlawful carry. He hasn't told his atty about this, and she is unaware. She calls him up, establishes how my client had her new BF over on X, Y, Z nights. Judge is very conservative. Not pleased. Then, opposing counsel passes the witness. I ask him if he has a job. No. What do you do for money? Things here and there. Oh. M's. Opposing counsel is awfully expensive. Do you sell dogs? What? Have you ever sold dogs to make ends meet? I know. Introduce a copy of his guilty plea and straight probation sentencing. Judge is now staring daggers at him. I lean over to my client sitting next to me and whisper, if you took a dog test today, be honest. Would you be completely clean? Yes. I ask the young man. When was the last time you did dogs? He objects. But judge overrules. I know this judge will test people on the spot as he is also the misdemeanor dog court judge. It's been years. I'm clean. So, if you were tested, you'd be clean? Yes. Opposing counsel asks the same of my client. We agree. Judge has them both tested. He tests positive. My client is clean. Judge denies his motion and asks me to send in new temp orders where young man is required to maintain employment and start paying child support and places him on supervised visits. Icing on the cake. Opposing counsel actually calls me and leaves me a voicemail congratulating me on, and I quote, handing her A to her for the first time in a long time. That last part is nice. Your opponent didn't take it personally and even showed respect. Nice. Not a lawyer, but this happened to my family. My husband's kids asked us to fight for full custody after years of systematic abuse from their mom. My stepdaughter was assaulted and the mom decided to marry a guy who was best friends with the guy who assaulted her. Mom never told us what happened, never got her counseling, never reported it to the police. In mediation she brought up a conversation I had with her which she denied ever happening until then. She started saying lie after lie and all my husband had to say was my wife had that conversation with you to explain how uncomfortable my daughter is living with this man because he is connected to her assault. The mediator was not amused. She said you have someone living in your house who is connected to your daughter's assault. Your relationship with your children is broken. She spent the rest of the session sobbing and signed away custody because this was just the tip of the iceberg that we had on her and she knew it. Hearing her sobbing made me so happy after all she put these kids through. I usually don't want people to suffer, but after warning her this guy was coming between her and her kids and then her lying about the context of that conversation, I'll make an exception. I tried to stop her from the chain of events that lead us to court and she tried to use it against me. Not a lawyer, but this story always gets me. My biological grandmother died 20 years ago. She left all her money, trusts, bonds to my grandfather to use while alive and disperse after death. My grandfather remarried something like 15 years ago to my step-grandma. My grandfather ended up dying first a few years back. My step-aunt is very greedy and lives on the opposite side of the country. She's lived off of her mother and my grandfather for all of her life. She'd come over and take them on vacation where she'd use their money to buy herself things and get a free skiing trip about 8 times a year. After my grandfather passed, my step-grandma had to move where her children live to get care for dementia. My step-aunt has access to not only her own mother's estate but my grandfather's as well to take care of her needs. That wasn't enough. She decided to try and sue my dad and uncle for their dead biological mother's estate. My dad is bilaterally paralyzed and in a wheelchair. My uncle is a triple bypass survivor with a pacemaker and multiple stents. Both are on fixed disability income. The court date came and I literally wheeled my dad in while my uncle walked with a cane. My step-aunt is entirely able-bodied and rolling in the millions my step-grandma and grandfather worked their whole lives to earn. The judge took one look at the whole picture and she was absolutely denied access to my biological grandmother's estate. We were there for less than an hour. Well, not my story, but a prior boss's story. They had a drunk driver case at the time when they were a general practitioner. My boss was representing the family that got hit, one where the 2 kids and the wife had died, but the father had not. and wanted the college guy's drunk driving skin to be mounted on a wall. This was back before Facebook was commonly used in court proceedings and before tons of people realized that shit's too great for any attorney worth their weight in salt to pass up. So, the kid, drunk driving college kid, had managed to get the judge's sympathy during the first part of the hearing by saying he was sorry. Haunted. Never going to drink again. This was going to ruin his life. Etc. The judge seemed to really be eating it up. Then comes my boss and immediately burns this kid's remorse to the ground by showing numerous Facebook statuses and photos of them binge drinking, partying, and even joking about driving drunk from the date of the accident up until a night ago. The kid looked like he was being forced to swallow hot coals and the judge was absolutely livid. Needless to say, the kid had to do way more than just apologize and be remorseful after that. There was a case going on in my town between a father and son that was hilarious. The dad is a big time personal injury attorney around here who started his own firm under his name. George Sink and his son ended up joining the family business. Well, they had a falling out, so the son goes off to start his own firm. He has his dad's name. So the dad is suing the son for using the name he gave him to start his own law firm. But I had a client who was accused of a very nasty assault. He had an alibi. He was at work, where he was the boss. He had an employee who could absolutely vouch for his being there. I talked to the employee. Employee confirmed this. It gets closer to the trial, and around the time when I need to send in an alibi notice, which is advance notice to the Crown so that they can investigate the alibi and determine whether or not it's true. But I am being careful. So I call the employee up again. Turns out my client fired him in the interim. And so the employee quite candidly tells me, "Oh, yeah, he was definitely at work. But that's not what I'll say in court. F that guy. He is going down. I did not call him as a witness or file the alibi notice. Still won the trial. But if I hadn't thought to call the guy, or if he'd been less candid, my client would have been messed up hard. Offender registry, jail time, the works. Completely innocent."